Picture this: Good Friday, April 23rd, 1014. The sun rises over Dublin Bay, revealing two vast armies facing each other across the meadows of Clontarf. By sunset, over 7,000 warriors will lie dead, and Ireland's most powerful king will be murdered in his tent while praying. This is the story of the Battle of Clontarf, a clash that would echo through Irish history for 1,000 years. Today, we're journeying back to medieval Ireland, to a time when the island was fragmented into warring kingdoms, when Viking longships prowled the coasts, and when one extraordinary man nearly succeeded in uniting the entire nation under a single crown. This is the true story of Brian Boru, the High King of Ireland, and his final desperate stand at Clontarf. Drawing from the most reliable historical sources, the Annals of Ulster, the Annals of Innisfallen, and contemporary chronicles, we'll uncover what really happened on that fateful day, separating myth from historical reality. Our story begins not with the battle itself, but decades earlier, in the fortress of Kincora, near Killaloe in County Clare. Born around 941 AD, Brian was the youngest of 12 brothers in the Dal Cais clan, a family with ambitious dreams but little power. Young Brian grew up in a land terrorized by Viking raids. These Norse warriors had established formidable settlements in Limerick, Waterford, and Dublin, and their attacks devastated Irish communities for generations. Tragedy struck early in Brian's life. Viking raiders brutally killed members of his family, including his mother. These losses forged Brian into a fierce warrior with an iron determination to drive the foreigners from Irish soil and unite the fractured kingdoms under one rule. Brian's military career began in earnest in 967 at the Battle of Sulcoit, where he fought alongside his brother Mothgamon against the Norse of Limerick. When Mothgamon was treacherously murdered in 976, Brian avenged him by slaying the Norse king of Limerick and his sons. From that moment, Brian's star began to rise. What set Brian apart from other Irish kings was his innovative military strategy. Unlike his contemporaries, he built powerful fleets to match the Vikings' naval superiority, constructed fortifications for both defense and offense, and wasn't afraid to use Viking mercenaries when it served his purposes. By 999, he had captured Dublin itself, though he strategically restored the Norse king Sigtrygg Silkbeard to the throne as his vassal, even marrying Sigtrygg's mother, the formidable Gormlaith. In 1002, the reigning High King Mael Secnial surrendered his title to Brian without a fight, an unprecedented achievement. For the first time in Irish history, someone from outside the Uí Níl dynasty held the high kingship. Brian worked tirelessly to consolidate his power, gaining the submission of Ulster in the north and Connacht in the west. In 1005, he made a ceremonial journey to Armagh, Ireland's religious capital, and donated 20 ounces of gold, cementing his claim as not just a military conqueror, but Ireland's legitimate Christian monarch.
But power, once gained, is difficult to hold. In 1013, rebellion erupted. Mael Morda, King of Leinster, who Brian had once defeated and then appointed to the throne, rose in revolt. He allied with Sigtrygg of Dublin, who, despite being Brian's son-in-law, turned against him. Sigtrygg traveled across the Irish Sea, recruiting Viking mercenaries from the Orkney Islands under Earl Sigurd, and from the Isle of Man under the pagan warrior Brodir. The stage was set for the greatest battle Ireland had ever seen. As winter gave way to spring in 1014, both sides prepared. Brian mustered the forces of Munster and was joined by his former rival, Mael Secnial of Meath, and two kings from Connacht. They marched on Dublin. The Viking fleets from Orkney and Man arrived during Holy Week, their dragon-prowed ships filling Dublin Bay. On Good Friday morning, the two armies met at Clontarf, a meadow on the north shore of Dublin Bay, where the river Tolka flows into the sea. Brian, now in his 70s, was too old to fight. He remained in his tent, praying for victory, while his son Murchad commanded the Irish forces in battle. The battle began at sunrise and raged throughout the day. The fighting was ferocious and hand-to-hand. Brian's forces gradually gained the upper hand, and by late afternoon, the Dublin-Leinster coalition began to break. The retreating warriors fled toward their ships, but here's where nature itself intervened. According to the contemporary chronicles and later calculations, the tide at Clontarf would have been high at 5:30 in the morning when the battle began, and high again at 5:55 in the evening as it ended. As the defeated forces tried to escape, they found their ships had been carried away by the rising tide. Caught between the advancing Irish army and the incoming sea, they were slaughtered in their thousands. Men drowned trying to reach safety. The annals record them lying in heaps and in hundreds along the shoreline. Among the fallen were the most prominent leaders on both sides. Murcad, Brian's valiant son, killed Earl Sigurd of Orkney, but was himself mortally wounded. Brian's grandson, Tordelbach, drowned while pursuing enemies into the surf. Mal Morda, the Leinster king who had sparked the rebellion, fell in combat. The Viking leader Brodir also met his end. But the most consequential death occurred away from the main battlefield. As Brian knelt in prayer in his tent, a small group of fleeing Vikings, some say it was Brodir himself, stumbled upon the king's encampment. They overwhelmed his bodyguard and found the 73-year-old monarch defenseless. With a battle axe, they struck down Ireland's greatest king on the very day Christians commemorate Christ's crucifixion. The Norse saga, Njal's saga, would later record, "The men of Ireland will suffer a grief that will never grow old in the minds of men." The Battle of Clontarf was a decisive Irish victory, but a Pyrrhic one. Between 7,000 and 10,000 men perished that day, a staggering death toll for medieval Ireland. Brian had won the battle, but lost his life, and with him died his dream of a unified Ireland. Without Brian's leadership, the Dál Cas clan couldn't maintain control. Ireland reverted to its old pattern of feuding kingdoms. Niall Sec Niall reclaimed the high kingship, but he was elderly and weak. Dublin remained a Norse city, though its power was diminished. It would take another century and a half before Norman invaders would change Ireland's destiny again. The Battle of Clontarf has been mythologized over the centuries. Later writers portrayed it as a simple conflict between Christian Irish and pagan Vikings, a narrative that doesn't match the complex reality. The truth is more fascinating. This was essentially an Irish civil war with Viking participants on both sides. Brian himself employed Viking mercenaries. Yet Brian Boru's legacy endures. He remains Ireland's most celebrated medieval monarch, a symbol of what Ireland might have become had circumstances been different. His tactical genius, his vision of a united Ireland, and his tragic death on Good Friday ensured his place in legend. If you found this story compelling, I encourage you to explore the primary sources. Read the Annals of Ulster, examine Sean Duffy's authoritative 2013 biography, Brian Boru and the Battle of Clontarf, or visit the National Museum of Ireland's exhibition on Clontarf. The battle site itself, now a suburb of Dublin, still whispers its secrets to those who listen. Share this story with others who love history. The tale of Brian Boru reminds us that great leaders can emerge from humble origins, that courage and vision can reshape nations, and that even in death, a single life can inspire a people for 1,000 years. This is history not as we wished it to be, but as it truly was, complex, brutal, and utterly unforgettable.